Thank you so much for joining me today in my speaker series to celebrate International Women's Month. I really think it's important that we take this time to really recognize and acknowledge underrepresented voices. Historically, this month has been about feminism, about standing up for women's rights, about celebrating the history of women and the achievements and the accomplishments, but also just the journey of what it's been for us to have the rights that we have today. And we all have our stories. I have a story, and I think the International Women's Month or Day will resonate with us in the way that connects with our stories and with our work. This talk today will be focusing on my journey from silence to spotlight. And for me, what that has looked like is really this individual journey of feeling silenced in a lot of different aspects of my life, and how I was able to transform that and really feel comfortable with myself and who I am in the spotlight. And that doesn't mean attention, that doesn't mean fame, that means liberation. For me, silence to spotlight is who I am as a person, and not being afraid to be who I am as a human being everywhere I go in society. I think spotlight to me also means, how are we helping uplift other voices that are not just mine? When we get to a point in our journey when we find that liberation and we've done all our inner work, it no longer is about us. It becomes about all of us. And that's something that I really, really hope to invite to every single one of us here today, listening and tuning in. This period of silence in my life really started from the time when I was a kid. I grew up half Mexican, half Italian, so lots of great food growing up. But I think there was also a lot of intergenerational trauma that I really carried with me. And I think that in a way really silenced me. It really held me back from being who I am as a person. It made me afraid to show up. And that manifested in a lot of different ways. Sometimes that looked like being afraid to be me. Sometimes it looked like being afraid to make a mistake, being shamed and guilt tripped for any little mistake that I made. And that impacted me in a lot of different ways. I think it's one thing to just say it and speak it and talk about it, but the way that it actually shows up, the space that it actually takes up in the body, in just navigating life, I think was really, really detrimental. And I don't think I understood that until now, until being 31. I also think that given my diverse representation, I felt like I didn't really belong anywhere. And this was really, again, silencing for me. I think most of us have gone through school, elementary school, high school, being made fun of for our looks, our appearances. I think if you're someone who is diverse, that's pretty common. I also think that the way that diversity is represented in the media really impacted this in the way that I was perceived from people. It's a much better now where we are today, but back when I was younger and growing up, there wasn't a lot of half Mexicans or full Mexicans in general in Western media. And I think it was really, really challenging to grow up that way. And in a lot of different ways. One way automatically was just, products that I use and things that I bought. I grew up in Northern Ontario, and getting a haircut, like today my hair is straight, but my hair typically is very, very curly. And it was a challenge to find someone to cut my hair, a very basic human life necessity. Very, very hard, very challenging. We would go to salons and they would turn me away. They'd be like, yeah, no. And I was like 10 years old, and then I would be turned away just because there was no one who knew how to do that. And I think that was really challenging because when I was younger, I didn't have that role model in the media to look up to. I didn't, when products are being marketed, again, for curly hair, there was no one there that was really repping anyone that looked like me and said, hey, this is the product that I use. And so I actually ended up using a lot of products that didn't actually work for me, damaged my hair, made it look really bad. And I know it sounds silly, trivial to be talking about hair, but if you are someone who is diverse like myself, you actually know the impact that has on you. It's not just about your hair, it's about how you feel about yourself. How we present ourselves to the world is what we're showing about ourselves. And if we don't feel great about ourselves, that does impact how we're going to show up. It also influenced me in the career path that I had chosen. I was someone who, if you looked at my resume and if you looked at my career path, it looked very attractive, right? I finished my master's, and then I was the chief operations officer at a gene therapy company, and all that's all fine and dandy. But I was miserable, but I chose that path because that is the path that was like presented to me, or it was like, especially coming from a family of immigrants who I believe were taught to value themselves based on what society had taught them, right? I had immigrant parents and immigrant grandparents. I had immigrant grandparents. My mother is an immigrant as well from Mexico. She had education, but like my grandparents did not have education. And so I think they were really taught to think of themselves as less than simply because they didn't have that. And I really think that that was passed on to me. And so I ended up in this pathway thinking that this is who I'm supposed to be and who I have to be. But I was miserable. I hated it. And I spent most of my 20s in that career path, but being absolutely miserable. I was so unhappy, and I didn't feel like I belonged. And I've only recently even really understood how unhappy I really, really was during that time of my life. And it's going through that industry as well. I was working in tech and medical technology and startup and corporate innovation, and those spaces are obviously very male dominated. And so when you add that layer to it, it was a really, really miserable experience for me in my young 20s. My first job was a chief operations officer position, and it was very exhausting to be that young, have all these responsibilities, but also not have the support and the support system and the space to actually thrive in that role, working alongside male colleagues who were twice my age, working in this industry that didn't really want women to be there. And that was really hard. And so I felt in all of these ways, I was really silenced. I was silenced in these personal ways. I was silenced in my professional life. I was silenced, really I was silenced within. And when I took the time in my 20s to really stop wandering, I think that life has a weird way of working. I think when life wants you to slow down and revisit and think twice or offer a bit of a course correction, life will do that. Everything will implode. Things will start to fall apart, and it's so daunting, and it's so terrifying, and it's so confusing, and it's so frustrating to just be sitting in this mess of just crap whirling around you and not knowing what's going on. But that's kind of where my life headed. I was exhausted. I had dealt with, I was sexually assaulted. I had lost my father at the same time. I had a bunch of these just crap that I was really dealing with, and it all really forced me to slow down despite all the good things that were happening and despite how things appeared in my career. And so I was forced to really slow down, and I was really forced to take that time to really connect with myself and really get to know this silenced version of me and who this person was and where she came from, and learning how to hold space with herself, learning how to appreciate who she is as a person, learning to respect her journey. That to me came through writing. I started journaling. That led to my first book, Human. It's been quite successful. It's been featured in Times Square. I'm really, really humbled about it. I think it's something that you don't ever think is going to happen, right? But I took that time, I wrote that book, and I started seeing me. And that was the first time in my life I was seeing myself for who I was, not for what the media told me who I should be, not what society told me I should be, because I was like immigrant. I could only have these jobs and this and this. I could only have this type of education so I could be successful. I started seeing what success looked like for me, and that wasn't my career path. It wasn't anything that I was doing at that time was not what I wanted success to be for me. And in fact, now, if you were to ask me today, what do I want success to look like? To me, success is my happiness. Success is my well-being. Success is the ability to lift myself, but to also uplift others. That is what success looks like to me. I don't even think I use the word success anymore. I think it's about happiness, well-being, how in community I feel with people. That to me is what happiness and success looks like. It's how comfortable I feel in my own skin, in my own body. It's how embodied I feel in who I am as a human being. Being able to fully embrace and embody like everything I could possibly feel, from the hard things to the not hard things. This is, to me, what it means to be me, and what it means to be happy, to know that I have the space and the safety to always, always, always be myself and who I am, regardless of what's happening around me. So as I continued writing and continued creating, this silenced version of me started to feel safe. She was safe in who she was as a human. She was heard, she was validated in the ways that she needed to be. And she started seeing things for what they were and for what they are. She started sorting out and understanding these things are mine and these things are not mine. And she started realizing that she had a choice to choose what she wanted to take, what she wanted to claim as her own, and how she wanted to move forward. The silenced version of me also started doing the things that she loved. And that was music and singing. And to me as an artist, I say this all the time, I feel the most liberated when I am singing and performing and playing piano. And I'm not someone who has been playing since I was a baby. I'm not trained in any way, shape, or form. I am classically trained. Sorry, I'm not. I am self-trained. But I've had to do that myself. But that was always me and my calling. And I feel sometimes when I look back on my journey, I feel sad that I procrastinated that, because it is really who I am as a person. It is who I am, and it is my most authentic self. My most liberated self is that woman who you will see singing and performing. And it's crazy to me that I had to get to a point of complete breakdown to trust that that was what I wanted for myself. And so that silenced version of me really started taking that a little bit more seriously and found so much safety and comfort in music. And when I say I grew up feeling like I never belonged anywhere, music is that space for me where I belong. There is something about just being able to really be one with music and the notes, and I think with your voice, like hearing my voice when I sing is not for me this thing of skill and talent. Hearing my voice when I sing is, wow, like that is me sharing my story and the depths of my story. And it's not just in words or in lyrics, it's in your voice, that instrument that is your voice. And I really started to appreciate that when I was in this silenced version of me and really finally committing to the things in the craft that I love so much. This to me is what it means to be in the spotlight. It's not about fame, it's not about attention, it's not about social media numbers and impressions and clicks and all the things and sales. To me, it's being me and who I am and permitting myself to be who I am so that I can show up and make the world a better place. And that has come through my work, through my music, which is dropping quite soon, which I'm super excited about. But that is what it means to be in the spotlight for me, is telling these stories. When I talk about being a diverse artist, the way that shows up in my music is not even necessarily through the cultural traditions of music. So for example, myself being Mexican and Italian, but for me, it's in those stories of what it felt like to never belong, what it felt like to feel like society didn't want you there, what it felt like to have to navigate this world that made you feel like you didn't belong there, that you weren't allowed to be there, and that you weren't allowed to be yourself. That thread is a thread that you will hear in my music, because I experienced that as a person, as a diverse person, as just a human being in general. I carried a lot of that with me, and you will hear that. You will also hear in my music this power of collectivity. You know, this hope that people can come together in society, that we can create something a little bit different, a little bit more equitable. Obviously not in those words, it's all through storytelling, but that is the story that you will hear in my music. And for those of us who felt that way, who knew we were not allowed to be here in society, who knew that we were not welcome here, this will resonate with you. This will call you, and you will know exactly what I'm talking about. But again, I don't think it's just about my voice. I think it's about all of our voices together. And so for me, being in the spotlight is not just about spotlighting my voice, but it's about spotlighting all of our voices. And you'll see that in my podcast, in the Human Challenge. We're in our third season, I believe now. Yes, third. And when I first started it, it was a little bit more spiritual almost, a little bit more interview focused. But in our third season, we really, really dialed into this really beautiful documentary style type of storytelling. And we focus on all underrepresented voices. So stories from formerly incarcerated people, Indigenous voices, Palestinian voices, women's issues we focus on as well, refugee stories and immigrant stories. All of these voices that have not been allowed to be heard, all of these stories that have not been welcome in society, those are the voices and the stories that we tell in the Human Challenge. And I feel really proud and really blessed and really grateful that we get to share these stories, but also that I am trusted to share these stories. I know what it's like to have these deep scars and wounds that we feel have come from the system. I know how that feels, and I know how hard it is to talk about it. And I am blessed when I interview people and they'll send me a message and say, hey, thanks so much for sharing my story. Thanks for creating space for that conversation. I've had one interview guest who had thanked me for, she thanked me for allowing her to heal through our interview. And I think getting messages like that is just so inspiring and so touching. And I feel so grateful to be a part of those moments, to be a part of other people's lives in that way. But we're actually just announced that we're on Sirius XM, which is really exciting. We can be found there now. We can be found on all the other podcast channels. We also air on Rogers TV. And I love it. I love knowing it because it tells me that I'm not the only one who cares about these stories. It tells me that my guests are not the only one who cares about these stories. I think that in society, we are hungry for these stories because we know something is wrong with society. We know something is wrong with the way the world is working right now, but we don't know where to go. And I think it starts here. It starts here in the stories. It starts at allowing ourselves to create spaces to hear these stories so that we can create a society that is reflective of every single one of us here, because right now that's not the case. And this is exactly where my foundation, the Being Human Foundation, comes in. This is exactly what we do. We use storytelling to create this equitable society that is a reflection of all of us. And we do that through different programs, through different funding avenues. We'll have some announcements coming out about some of those programs that will be available. But that to me is the spotlight, is spotlighting those stories. And it's not just about that attention and that fame, it's about change, right? We share these stories so that we can create change. And that leads me here to my favorite quote by Archbishop Desmond Tutu. My humanity is bound up in yours, for we can only be human together. It just is so, so powerful to me. And I think it really reminds me that the heart of any change really comes from our stories, because that is how we can bound and connect our humanity together again. It comes through understanding. And we have that understanding when we are willing to listen, when we are willing to show up, and when we are willing to channel that into something so much deeper, so that humanity isn't just a word. It's this thing that we become. It's this thread that connects all of us. And when we can tap into that and harness that, we actually can create something so much better, so much more powerful, so much more equitable for everyone. A society that is reflective of who we are today. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to leave it here. I'm super excited to say that proceeds from tonight's event will be supporting the children of Shingwauk Alumni Association. And thank you to a few donors. We have we have raised almost $300 in total. So thank you so much for contributing to society. And we chose Children of Shingwauk Alumni Association because next week is National Indigenous Languages Day. And so we wanted to make sure that we were respecting the Indigenous culture. We wanted to respect that Indigenous tradition. And you can actually expect a special episode of The Human Challenge featuring Shirley Horn, talking about her story and her new book about her life in a residential school. It's really, really touching. It's a really beautiful story. She'll talk a little bit about language and how that's one thing that's actually been missing for her and that's actually been hard for her. But thank you, everybody, for your support. I do hope that we'll take the time to reflect on this, and I hope we'll take the time to respect our Indigenous community members next week. Thank you.